Okay, I will start. Good day, everyone. Welcome to HUMA. My name is Minenhle Ncube, and I'm a doctoral fellow at HUMA. This is the 9th session of our book lunch series, one of our many other seminar series we have at HUMA. Of those who are new to this HUMA space, this is the Institute of Humanities in Africa at the University of Cape Town. HUMA, in a nutshell, situates South Africa and Africa and looks to build intellectual and institutional links with researchers and knowledge communities on the continent and globally in line with our research agenda. In this book lunch series, we have an author from the City of Kings, that is Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, Makhosi Mahlangu. He is a foodie, a chef, an academic, and he calls himself a Pansula for life. He has a strong background in food processing, novel food designs, modern culinary trends, sustainable food trends, and science, and the science acumen in traditional African foods, or in short, TAFs. He comes from a village called Sivalo in Gaya district in Zimbabwe, one of the world's most food insecure regions in sub-Saharan Africa. He has a BSc in food science and technology from the University of Zimbabwe. He's worked in numerous restaurants in South Africa, which crafted his deep interests in food development. He has a Bachelor of Science honors degree in animal science management from Lupane State University in Zimbabwe, and he also has a Master of Science in animal studies from the University of Fort Hare. He studied for another master's in food and beverage innovation and management at the Marsh Polytechnic University, which is near Parma in Italy. And for those who might know, Parma is a popular food city and one of the world's capitals of food. And all of these experience and accomplishments that he's had, Makhosi has grown his intrinsic knowledge of Italian, African, and other cuisines. In Zimbabwe, he's involved with the Amagugu Food Expo. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, he's involved with the Traditional African Food and Agriculture Expo in Kinshasa. He currently lectures food science at Lupane State University, focusing on traditional African foods. And he's also the founder of African Food Revolution, an organization concerned with food production in Africa. His discussant today, who we're waiting, we're not sure whether he can make it, is Njati Kabui, an expert in food literacy and a medical anthropologist and farmer with a background in coffee farming, who has studied at Lemoyne Owen College in New York and Memphis as well, with a vast experience in the food industry, who likes to share his culinary skills and expertise on food justice across the world. Today, the book that Makhosi Mahlangu is presenting is titled Our Food, Our Heritage, Our Future, which examines traditional African foods, TAFs, in Zimbabwe and discusses the evolution of these foods through migration patterns. TAFs were widely consumed before colonization, and the surge in the intake of sugar and oil-rich meals has had a negative impact on the present African generation, which has a high rate of obesity. Makhosi argues that a food revolution on the continent could facilitate the transformation of sugar diets to balanced meals that contain all critical elements or nutrients, including probiotics. I'll allow Makhosi to have the floor to share much more on this amazing book. Very interested to hear on the evolution of food related to migration, and we're happy to discuss your book further. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really happy with that book. We will be discussing traditional African foods.
Makhosi,
So,
we can't hear you very well. There seems to be a somewhat
okay, can you hear me now?
some noise that's very distracting over your audio.
Okay. Can you hear now?
Yeah, I think this is a lot better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just take off the earphones and then we can
Perfect.
talk about traditional African foods. I think, yeah, you've already said so much about what I do, the type of job that I do. So I'll try and share my presentation today on traditional African foods. So there's a lot that we discuss in terms of African foods. It's something that we haven't delved into. It's not documented. So let me try and share my presentation, and we start with the presentation. Can you just give me a sec? Sorry about that. I'm having tech problems.
Are you trying to share your screen, Makhosi?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do.
Are you using a mobile or laptop?
Mobile. Unfortunately, we don't have
Okay.
electricity. That's a sad part again.
Okay, I think if you press on the three dots, you'll see a menu, and the menu
Yes.
should give you a share screen option. If I'm correct, I think.
Okay. I'm trying to get there. Sorry about that. I'm failing to share.
That's not a problem. If you are able to see the your presentation, you can speak from it, and
Okay.
we can still engage from there. Yeah.
Okay. I can talk about it and then we just go ahead.
Yeah.
On the presentation is. So my presentation is our food, our heritage, our future. I hope you can hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you. We hear you.
Yes. Okay. So it's our food, our heritage, our future. So here it's a diverse topic where we talk about our food, we talk about traditional food, we talk about our heritage, which is like what we've had from our forefathers. And we talk about the future. Remember, the food systems are changing a lot. So we are going to look at that in my presentation. So initially, what are traditional African foods? So the traditional African foods, we describe them as the indigenous foods that we find in Africa. So you find out that due to colonization, we had new food systems that we adopted. We adopted things like fish and chips. I like to talk about fish and chips. We adopted things like the Cornish paste, but we had our own foods, which were part of the African systems. So we look at small grains. Here at Lupane University, we're starting a lot of small grains, which is the pearl millet, the finger millet, and the sorghum. So we'll discuss that further. So in this book, Our Food, Our Heritage, Our Future, you realize that I wrote it with numerous co-authors. I wrote it with renowned historian, Pati Sanyati. I also wrote it with Njati. We talked about him earlier. We also wrote with Roger Coanet from Italy. He stayed in Africa and he stays in Italy. So he made a comparison between our traditional African foods and the Italian foods. So you will discuss this more, that there's a similarity between the traditional African foods and the Italian foods. I'll talk about that later on during my presentation. So we also wrote the book with Sarah Savory. Sarah Savory is a daughter to Alan Savory, who's the master and pioneer of regenerative farming. You realize that nowadays United Nations, FAO, WHO are now pushing for regenerative farming. So he's like the father of regenerative farming. So in the book, I worked with the daughter, and she has a chapter, the final chapter, which is the future of African foods. So all these things, we'll discuss them as we go. So that's how the book came about, because we didn't have what I would say our own food being documented. So you go across Africa, there's very little literature on our food. So when I came back from Italy, I thought it was a really novel and good idea to document these foods. And that's how we came about with this project on indigenous food. So when we talk about these foods, they are not high in sugar. Sorry about that, electricity is back. They're not high in sugar, they're not high in oils. So we will discuss which type of foods they are. And then it all started in KwaZulu-Natal. If you look at how migration, I talked about it, that we'll talk about migration and how our foods developed. So I think if we've read about history, we know that there was Chagazulu. So Chagazulu had a fallout with Mziligas, Ogamachogan. So after that fallout, Mzilikazi formed his own kingdom. He left KwaZulu-Natal with roughly about 300 followers. And from KwaZulu-Natal, these are people, the Kumalos, who were of Zulu descent. So what we learned from there is there were dishes from the Zulu.
Hello, Mahlangu, are you there? We cannot hear you. I think there's a break in your connectivity. Not sure you can hear me. Yeah, we still cannot hear you. Seems to be a connectivity issue with Mahlangu. Not sure if he is still in the room. I think he's I think he's left. He'll be back trying to connect. But I guess while we're waiting for him, I took a look at Makhosi's book earlier today, and it does provide a good historical overview of movement as he mentioned, of people following the breakaway from the Zulu kingdom in KwaZulu-Natal. And what I notice is that I think those movements that occur from the south to north do play a pivotal role in the shift or the evolution of culinary practices. And he mentioned earlier that he likes to talk about fish and chips and Cornish pastes, both of which are British dishes, very popular in Zimbabwe, given our British colonial history. I think it's interesting to understand or identify the ways in which food evolves from an integration perspective, with the integration of people, integration of different cultures. I see Makhosi is back. Okay. I was just trying to offer my 2 cents on your book, but I'll let you have the floor.
All right, sorry about that, electricity issues and the Wi-Fi, but let me go back to what I was saying. So if you look at where the Ndebele people came from, they came from KwaZulu-Natal. So when there was a fallout with Shaka Zulu, Mzilikazi with 300 followers left KwaZulu-Natal. So the first people he met were the Tswanas and the Sothos. So when we got there, we learned a lot. Some were assimilated into the Ndebele group. So that's when we started learning about sorghum, right? I mentioned before that we have sorghum, we have pearl millet, and we have finger millet. And these are wonder cereals because they are low in GI. Remember, we've got a really big problem with obesity in sub-Saharan countries. So these cereals were wonder crops, which our grandfathers used to consume. And then that's what we learned from the Tswanas and the Sothos. And interesting, it's just after the Drakensberg Mountain where we got to learn about these wonder cereals, right? So what happened is that Mzilikazi continued on his track. He's absorbed some cultures into his small population, and they are migrating, they're moving. And after that, they've learned the foodstuff from the Tswanas and the Sothos. And one thing about the Sothos is that they always used to carry a knob carry. So another thing that we learned, which was like a delicacy, which is there with our grandfathers, but we've lost it, is mountain hare. You know, mountain hare. So it makes a really good delicacy, and it came from the Sothos. And then from there, we traveled all the way to Mhlanhlandlela, which is current Pretoria, where more tribes were assimilated into this group. So what was happening is that we're learning a lot of diversity, food diversity, and we were learning about the indigenous trees, which we find. Remember, there are a lot of indigenous trees that we have, specifically if you look at trees like the amarula, those are indigenous trees. So what really transpired is that when they were traveling, they got to Mahlangu, where my grandparents came from, Mahlangu. So Mahlangu, I'm a descendant of the great King Makhosi. So I know my line and how we traveled all the way up to Zimbabwe and the dishes that we had. So when they got to my village, I'll say my village, my grandfather's village, they learned a couple of dishes from there, dishes like what we call isatiane, which is porridge and milk. So it's really like a delicacy. Only people with cattle can have that dish. So they learned that. They also learned about traditional medicine. So if you were to research on King Makhosi, you find out that he was someone who knew a lot about traditional medicine. So with traditional medicine, you usually get it from also the indigenous trees or from animals, right? We talked about the mountain hare. We talked about how it became a delicacy. And then from Mpumalanga, when they had taken Mahlangu, the Mahlangus, they took them in. They moved to a place close to Marico River. So they also exchanged a lot. They stayed there for 5 years. And then when the Afrikaners came, remember they were moving from the Cape, they pushed them away from there. So they separated into 2 groups. One of the groups went through Botswana, and then the other one went through current Zimbabwe. So passing through current Zimbabwe, we realized that we meet the vendors, where we learned a lot again from the vendors. The vendor people had a dish which they still love, which is a mixture of grains, a mixture of maize, bambara nuts, and peanuts. Till this day, they love it. It's also there in our culture. So you can see that with the food, as we were migrating and exchanging ideas, with other cultures, we assimilated a lot of things. Then we moved from into Botswana, right? So when we got to Botswana, there are 2 interesting things that we learned from the Tswanas in Botswana, or probably the sun. We do not have documentation on that, but I look at the food, how the food was evolving. Remember, we've talked about numerous dishes that have been taken in. So you get to Botswana, actually there's a song that they used to sing for the king, where they would sing about the grass in Mahadi Plains, right? Where they would say that the grass doesn't die, it works well for the cattle. So we learned a lot about the grass species, remember. And one thing I also learned is that when they were migrating, there were important people amongst the population, the people who used to carry seeds. It's something that we haven't started. People who carry seeds, they carry the future. So we had those type of people. So we learned about grass species in Botswana. I have a feeling that they could have carried those grass species into current Zimbabwe. Then we also learned another interesting concept from the Tswana in Botswana, which we call seswai. Seswa is seswai, right? This is slow cooked meat. You slowly cook it until it falls off from the bone. So that's a delicacy in Botswana. People love it. So you find that in our culture, we also had it. And then we also learned about, there's a dish which we call, it's almost like a porridge which you make from melon. We also learned it from the patties. So that's where the migration helped us. And then when we left Botswana, you should understand that Mzilikazi walked all the way to the Zambezi River, the Zambezi Basin, right? So when we got to the Zambezi Basin, these are people, they are in Zimbabwe, they are called the Tonga. They are fishermen. They eat predominantly fish. And in Nguni culture, it's taboo to eat fish. So when we got there, I do not know what we ate. It's still open for debate. But one thing we learned are traditional trees, like the indigenous trees. If you look at in the book, we've documented 39 trees, indigenous trees, different fruits. We've also done a research where we now have a calendar for the fruits. We've documented 12. And it's interesting that you have these indigenous fruits right throughout the year. They are rich in nutrients. They are rich in also micronutrients. They offer food security because if you come to the villages in Zimbabwe, I think for those in the know, they know that the children walk at least 10 kilometers to the nearest school. So when they're walking, you find that where they walk, there are numerous trees, indigenous trees. So it's like they are walking through, I could say, a food market, a natural food market. And it really gives them food security and really important in Zimbabwe. So we've managed to document 39 trees and the different different uses of the trees, which are there in the book. Then after we left Binga, where the Tonga are, the Zambezi Basin, we moved back to the city of Kings, which we call Gobulawayo. So that's where everyone united, the Tswanas. You realize that the Ndebele people are different tribes. You have the Xhosa there, you have the Ngunis, we have the Vendas, we have the Tswanas, we have Petis in there, right? So it's just a group of tribes with different food cultures, right? And I believe that the modern the Ndebele is an evolution of all the culinary dishes. So you find that there are so many things. If you go to the Eastern Cape, you find that the Xhosas, they eat umngqushu, what we call umngqushu. Umngqushu, we also have it here in Zimbabwe. We also have isiswa. We have a lot of dishes that we've got. I would say we borrowed and modernized them from the other tribes. Then from there, we did a comparison. We all know that the best foodies are from Italy. We know that they've got the Parmigiano Reggiano, they've got the pizza, they've got the pasta, wonderful pasta, right? And then all of their food is organic. They say it's organic. They say it's sustainable. It lower food miles. They don't import a lot of food. So it's almost similar to the type of food that we have as traditional African food. Because if you look at, for instance, Mopane worms, you find that they've got a distribution within a certain geographic location. If you look for the amarula trees, they've got a specific geographic location. So it means people really eat from their geographic location. If you can, if you understand what I'm trying to put across. So the Italian system is also like that. Family-run businesses, sustainability, low GI foods, non-GMO, and it fits perfectly with the African food. And then we did a study with Roger. We saw that there's a lot of similarities, and when it comes to traditional African foods, we have a diversity. I think we've learned about diversity scores, where people have a diverse plates on their menu. You look at the Chinese. If you go into a Chinese restaurant, it's diverse. So it's the same as traditional African foods, where we are pushing commensality, which is eating together, which is eating using your hands. So those are type of things that we've had as traditional African foodies. And then we also looked at the future of traditional African foods. Where's the future? You realize that at first it wasn't documented. I think it's one of the few books that's documenting African foods in Africa. There's a problem with documenting our African food because we always try and make it Eurocentric. So you find that we eat in bulk as Africans, and we cannot do plating techniques where we have a 3-course meal. We just put everything at once, and then you eat whatever you want. So trying to revolutionize our food using a Eurocentric way, it's quite difficult. And as a revolution, we feel that we
Okay, I think we have another technical glitch. Mahlangu, you're frozen. We cannot hear you. Or is it just me? Is it my internet? Or can other people hear him?
No, we can't.
Okay. In case you can hear Mahlangu, we cannot hear you. Okay.
Hello. So yes, so that's where the future is. So with the future, we look at we've been looking at 4 aspects. We look at food, we look at architecture, we look at art, and we look at fashion. I think those are the things that really drive the development of any community. And we still haven't managed to do that. So that's where the African food revolution is taking it. We are promoting traditional African food. We are developing the future models of African food. And then also in the future, we would like to discuss the future African restaurant. So we are looking at that. We're working with architects. What is the future of the African restaurant? Is it, do we have hamburgers in there, or do we do our own traditional food? So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of developing this traditional African food, and even creating of seed banks in the villages. We do not have that. These foods, people do not have any nurseries or anything. So that's a big challenge in terms of developing the African food. So that's what the book talks about. It documents everything. It looks at the current affairs. It looks at the future. Where are we going in terms of the African food? So we are really working with a lot of people in developing this. And one thing we are looking into is collaborations between research institutes, trying to get the science into what we've documented already. Remember, there's not much, but in the villages, there's a lot. So it's a lot of work. It's the first documentation that we've done, and we are still small, but we are working towards developing the African food systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahlangu, for that
Yes.
good overview of your book. I noticed that your discussant, Kabui, Chef Kabui, is not in the room. So I will just offer my commentary on your book, as I did take a look at it a few times. So I think your book is a good historical overview of it. It offers a good historical account of the integration of people from different places, particularly from the south towards the north of what was then southern Rhodesia.
Yes.
And you do actually talk about the movement before the settling of Cecil John, before the arrival of the British, which is interesting.
Yes.
And you also do mention the time at which they arrived and the social and political implications of their settlement in then southern Rhodesia. And I think your book offers a good window, particularly for, at least for me as an anthropologist, I think it's a good window as an anthropologist for any future investigation on food evolution or epidemiological studies on how the past and present evolution of food might impact on health. You mentioned some interesting things in the book, such as the meat of specific parts of an animal that belong to particular people. Let's say, for example, the hind leg of an animal is not eaten by an elderly person because it comes across as disrespect or something. I hear some feedback from someone. I'll just mute them. So yes, I also kind of resonate with some of the information in the book, like the parts of the animal and who is supposed to eat that part, who eats the foot of a chicken, who eats the neck, who does not eat the back of the chicken. Those are interesting things. But what I think could be of future study, just as a departure from your book, are things like rituals associated with food. Since there wasn't much engagement on that, I think in the future, I think some examination on, I think he's left, I think Makhosi has lost connection, but I'll continue. I think in terms of rituals, food is also quite pivotal to the practice of rituals, traditional healing, and so forth. And I think his book is a good point of departure for that conversation. And also, he mentioned as well in contemporary Zimbabwe that the consumption of British dishes like fish and chips and Cornish pastes and so forth. And and also what's very popular is the perception of chomolia as an African kale that is used as a vegetable side when you're eating what we call ischwala or sata with your meat relish. I'm interested to know where that originates. I think that's also a British leafy vegetable that we've adopted as our own traditional side meal. So Makhosi, I was just saying that for your book offers a good point of departure to examine how rituals might evolve with the evolution of food, for example, and how other practices might evolve with the evolution of food. And you also mentioned school children having to eat certain fruit along the way to school. It's also a good point of interest to understand what Western education might teach these children about food. What impact does that Western thought have on how they perceive food in the future versus the past? So I think in the future, I think in terms of thinking about health, as you mentioned that indigenous food or foods are important for longevity or good health. I think from an epidemiological perspective, we could look at how the incorporation of different foods, whether they're British, whether they're Italian, in our own food has impacted on health. And then we could kind of measure to what extent we can, or how we can imagine the future restaurant or that you talk about. That's my comment from my side. I have some questions which I will pose later, but I will allow the audience space to pose any questions. If you have a question or a comment, you're welcome to use the emoticon function to raise a hand, and you're welcome to ask Mahlangu questions or comment. Tendai, you raised a hand. You're welcome to unmute and ask your question. Tendai, you're on mute. Can you hear me? Not sure she can, but we'll wait for her to figure the technicalities out. Meli, could you offer your question or commentary? Meli, Tendai, can you guys hear me? Okay, Tendai.
Hi. Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, I jumped in a little bit late, but I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation that was being given. My question for Makhosi is, I'm not sure if it was mentioned anywhere during the presentation, but have you explored, you spoke about plants, edible plants, you spoke about certain animals, you mentioned about the mountain, or is it a certain species of hare in Botswana, but have you explored also edible mushrooms as well, part of your study? And then another question that I had was, you also mentioned something quite interesting. You said that the Nguni people, you said something about they find it taboo, or it's taboo for them to eat fish. I found that quite interesting. I wasn't aware. Would you mind expanding on that?
Okay, I'll answer the first question. There's a chapter, I think it's chapter 7 in my book, where we talk about other foodstuffs that we consume. So in that chapter, we also have edible mushrooms. So there are numerous mushrooms that we do have, which were considered as wild mushrooms, where people just forage for them, and they get the mushrooms from the bush. And one interesting thing is that the people in the village know about these mushrooms. And then I was fortunate to have one of our colleagues from the department who's an expert in mushrooms. He's been studying traditional mushrooms. So he's the one who helped me document that section and also add the scientific names for the mushrooms. So in the book, I think we've got 5 different mushrooms, which are they are common with the indigenous tribes. Then with the second question with the fish, it comes from a totem point of view. We've got a ritual where if when we're born, the belly button, Inka, we throw it into the river, like we dispose of it in the river. It's a custom that's there. So when we throw it into the river, the fish eat that the belly button, and then we are not supposed to eat fish. But nowadays that custom is slowly going away, because a long time ago when we used to eat fish, our teeth will fall off. But nowadays, I do not know what's happening, or maybe it's Colgate that's keeping our teeth intact. I do not know. So that's some of the reasons why we did not used to consume fish. Thank you. I hope I answered your questions, Tina.
Thank you, Makhosi, for that response. There was a hand by Meli. I don't know if he's still here. I don't see him in the room.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Please go
Sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, sorry, the host wasn't allowing people to unmute. I think mine is more of a comment. Congratulations to Makhosi, who is a personal friend of mine. I think the issue that I want to comment about is, what your input was, but Makhosi was off. But well, it is book. I hope he knows what it is around, the culinary habits or practices, the presentation, and also the actual eating of food, like which part is eaten by whom and stuff. So I also would like to know if they explore that that theme a bit further into, how even power is perceived or thought about or influenced by these practices in that society, especially in the home, between the man and the woman, and also even broadly in society, if there are any connections in terms of how the food habits actually influence those kind of things.
Okay, can I answer you there, Mel?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the input. Actually, with the customs, there's a lot that's there. I'll just refer to one big fight. I'll say it's a fight or miscommunication between Chaga Zulu and Mzilikazi. So what happened is that Chaga gave Mzilikazi the hind leg of the beast. So if you are royalty, you do not eat the hind leg of a beast. You only eat the forequarter. So when they gave him that one, he refused to eat it. And that's where the fallout was. And he decided to leave that kingdom. So those are some of the customs. There's actually a book that's there that was written last year by Ubabu Patisanyati, which talks about the customs, why women used to eat separately from the men, why children eat alone, why the eldest has to pick up the piece of meat first. So many things are mentioned in that book. It's a 150-page book which talks about just food beyond nutrition. It's food as a custom. So it's interesting. There's a book that delves into that, but there's a lot we didn't document, which we are still learning in the villages. A lot of things that are there in the villages which weren't documented. So I'm happy that we are working as people with a common vision, documenting our culture, which almost got lost. We almost lost it, but we're doing our level best to document everything. Thank you, Melly.
Thank you, Makhosi. We have a hand from Elton. Elton, welcome. You're welcome to ask your question or comment. Oh, let me try and unmute. Wait. Not sure whether he can unmute.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening to everyone. I would like to congratulate Ukodonga on this adventure. What thrills me is that he fuses this issue of food with the culture. The few speakers or people have just commented, we have touched on culture and power in food. Actually, it's quite interesting that recently, if you remember, Makhosi, we in the news, we had a lady, a guy who was fined by the traditional leaders for actually giving, serving her husband with the so-called legs or whatsoever in the food. And you have also mentioned this issue, which it dates back from the times of Shaga. That's where it came. This saying where they say, so really you are on point there. Congratulations, my man.
Thank you so
especially
much.
for infusing culture into the food, not only food science and nutrition. So it also helps us to preserve our culture. And but what I didn't know when you talked about the Ngunis, is it all the Ngunis? What I know is the Kumalos and the likes, as you explained it, that they don't eat fish. Even the Mhlangas, the fish and Umhlanga, they are related there. So I am not sure whether it's all the Ngunis, because the Ngunis is white there. But otherwise, thank you very much. That's my contribution.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alton. Just a side comment,
Yes.
Alton taught me in high school. Such a pleasure to see him in the room. I'm so surprised.
Thank you.
So happy to
Wow.
see you after so many
Surprising.
years. It was really interesting. Does anyone else? Oh, there's another question. Yang An. Let's see if I can. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay.
Hello,
Hello.
can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My phone speakers are not working well, so I'm gonna put my next to my ear. I don't know. I'm still trying to form the question, but I think I'll just speak from my mind. In you speaking about, first of all, thank you so much for your work. It's such an incredible. I'm just looking at the first chapter online right now. But when you mention like documenting work, there's that the obvious information that has been deleted, erased by colonization, by imperialism. And I was wondering also, so in connection to that, in retaining information about food, I feel a lot of there are cultures where understanding food comes through oral tradition, or like just you learn to cook by watching, but there's no this. I mean, I'm also just speaking from experience, because when I ask my grandmother how to cook something, she'll just be like, no, you just put this here and you put that there and that's it. And I'm like, I want a recipe. Like all my white friends, they come to school and they have, oh yeah, this is my grandmother's recipe. Like, I don't have a recipe. So I was just wondering, in your research, like, because I haven't read through everything, but do you speak about also like that's the aspect of oral tradition, or like other ways of documenting food that is beyond text, but also includes text, but also now colonization, all of that.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, what we've done, what you're saying is really like a big problem. We rely so much on oral tradition, but there's another one which we are actually coming out with. You should remember that as Ndebele people were very spiritual. So we've managed to run away from that spirituality. So the spiritual world gives us a lot of ideas. For instance, in my PhD, I'm working on a beverage that almost disappeared. So the only way you can get such solutions is to go to a Sangoma and ask them how, and then they talk directly with the ancestors. So some of these answers are there using the traditional spiritual system. So it's something new. It's something we're looking at, and including the oral stories that our grandmothers passed to us. There were no recipe formulations. It was more of intuition, and I think it was more of passion. And our grandmothers used to have a lot of passion when they cook food, and they could standardize it on their own in the kitchen. So we are looking at that aspect, the oral tradition and the spirituality. The spirituality is something that we're looking seriously into, because some of these dishes will need to go via the spiritual lane to get the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Makhosi. We have a couple of other hands. Could we just could I ask Azza to go first and Minga to go as well before you respond, because we are running out of time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kosa, for the very interesting presentation. And it is actually a groundbreaking work, because there's not, as you said, there's not much work that's done on food in Africa. I found it interesting, this kind of comparison you did with African food and Italian food, you know, and you talked about the why is it comparable? Like, why do you think we could compare African food with Italian food? Which I mean, I could be wrong, but what I gathered that you talked about the locality of the food, the healthiness of the food, which I mean,
yeah.
It depends on which kind of Italian cuisine we are talking about, because not always Italian cuisines are healthy in that sense, you know,
Yeah.
with all the fat and all the wheat they have, you know, like yeah. So so it's yeah, for me it's an interesting, I mean, if you look at that from that perspective, that means you can actually compare African food with a lot of other local cuisines that are also somehow, yes, there's a lot of, so why Italian food specifically? Yes.
From a food science point of view, Italy is the one which pushes the organic movement. They also have what we call geographic indicators, where things like their balsamic vinegar, they come from a specific area. And if you look at how they've got passion with, let's say, the balsamic vinegar, they will tell you that Julius Caesar used to drink the same balsamic vinegar. So it means it's got a heritage, a really strong heritage. You also look at they are the ones who also have traditional processing systems. They also have their food is not spicy. So you find that in most Italian dishes, they use less than 5 ingredients to cook. And there's slow cooking, which is similar to the traditional African cooking ways, where we generally used to cook meat slowly until it's tender. We use a lot of local ingredients. So that's the reason why we say, no, we can make a comparison between the best and the undocumented. I would like to say our food is the undocumented. So we are working on the documentation, and probably will be number one in terms of quality food globally. That's our ambition, and that's where we see traditional African food in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Okay, just one quick also, I forgot, because I wanted to ask that about the future. And you mentioned that this movements of like going back to the organic, you know, this kind of also somehow Eurocentric kind of movements, you know, so because I mean, from your point of view, that we are always having organic food, so we don't need that sort of kind of movements, you know, but these are movements that are happening somewhere and somehow forced on us. So I would also like you to reflect on that. Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at what the big organizations are doing, specifically after COVID, you realize there are a lot of words they are using, sustainable, organic, and all those words are typically the African food systems. Because, for instance, if you take indigenous fruits, they are not irrigated. There's no commercial fertilizer used on them. It's just nature. and they just grow like that. You also look at if you look at animal products like sheep, the goats, most of the villagers do not have access to commercial dips and sprays for the ticks and everything, and they still use the ethno-veterinary ways that our grandfathers used to use. So according to food systems, the most expensive food systems, you find they are almost like African food systems. But the only problem is that we didn't document and we didn't have promoters for that food. We didn't have ambassadors. So what we are now, we're ambassadors and we're foodies of an African food revolution.
Thank you, Makhosi. I'm going to give the floor to a couple of more people. I will note that we have gone beyond our time limit. My apologies for that, but given that there's so much engagement, we will stay on and take some more questions, maybe for another 15 or so minutes, so that we accommodate other contributions. Minga, you can go first, and then Kurt.
Thank you so much, Makhosi, for such a wonderful presentation. By the way, you owe me a dish, and me. So I think your book is kind of like providing a starting conversation on how we can, or African can start documenting, their food, how we can document it and put it together. I always have a problem with when people speak about African food, Italian pasta, English cucumber, with all that. So yeah. I think there's this issue of appropriation of food. And also at the same time, there's also another issue of alienation of food, where some food get alienated. But what does it mean to you, according to you, when people speak about or use this term? Because even in the current book, you use the word African traditional food. What does it mean? Because I love watching what we call a food network, which when we look at the way food is being prepared, you can see something is completely different. And I think this is where Aza came with the question. Why compare with Italy only when there are other countries that you can compare to? So what does it mean when people appropriate food or alienate food, according to you? Thank you.
Yes, that's a very, very good question. For instance, I'll just delve away from the question a bit. We've got a challenge also with just the naming of our foods, right? So you find that things like ugali, we call it ugali, satsa, ischwal. When they are describing it, they describe it in a Eurocentric way. And we haven't got to a way where we document it according to our way. And one project I was working on now was we were writing a dictionary on culinary food, so that we don't have a problem where they compare our food to something else or alienate it. We have our own standard, and lexicography is one of the most important things in these projects. You find that most of these words are not there, even on Google. You look for traditional food, it's not there on Google. So those are some of the drives we are looking into in terms of not running away from our food as per se and copying some other food systems. We want to have our own food systems that are documented and have their own standards. I think I've answered. I answered.
Thank you. You did.
Thank you, Mahlangu. Thank you, Minga. Could we move on to Kurt Ackermann? You're welcome to ask or make a comment? Could my colleague, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was not able to unmute myself. Thank you for giving me a chance to comment and ask a question, and thank you very much for this session. It's been absolutely fascinating. And one of the things I just wanted to mention in following up is that I think the opportunity to contrast and show similarity and difference with Italian food culture is quite a rich one. It's certainly not the only one, but it's one that's quite telling in my opinion. You know, it being a very celebrated food culture, but it's not at all grounded in notions of purity or indigeneity. While it may have these descriptions of geographic origin of balsamic vinegar coming from one particular town and so on, there are many, many other things. I mean, pasta is made from wheat that came from Palestine, and there's a whole progression of noodles that stretch from China across the Silk Road to Italy. We have bao in Beijing, and we have ravioli in Venice. We have Italian tomatoes that come from the Americas, along with all of the bell peppers. We have buffalo mozzarella made with, you know, it's called burrata, made with water buffalo milk, which comes from Southeast Asia. There's risotto, which was brought to Sicily by the Moors or the Muslims in the 13th century. So there's a very rich food culture that really has grown out of the same kind of mixing that is really articulated in the book and that has been discussed in this session, which I think is wonderful because it allows one to not get distracted by notions of purity and to actually talk about what's nutritious, what's interesting, what's healthy, what works. And I think that in talking about African foods, I think that's very liberating. And that's my opinion and observation, and I just would like comment in response to that. Thank you.
Makhosi, is it possible to, is it okay if we have another comment before you respond to Kurt so that?
Okay, no, it's okay.
Okay, Neville, welcome to you're welcome to make a comment or ask a question.
Thank you, Minnie. Makhosi, well done before. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yes, I'd love to say I think you have done a wonderful job because I think in the broader spectrum as Africans, and if I can narrow it down to our own culture as Ndebeles, we haven't had really this documented food systems, as it were. So I think it goes on to open other avenues that also can help. As I think it's Elton who spoke about culture, but also I think it goes on to speak of the identity, because food is one of the most important things in a community, and we have seen that the younger generations or the generation probably starting from us coming down, we realize how much we look down upon our own food. I gave an example the other time that, for example, if you are dating somebody today, you take your date out and you give them the African food or our own food, for example. Trust me, you will never see that face again. But if you take that face, go with a hair to, for example, in Bulawayo, go
take it to Highfellis, get pizza, you get this Western food, you will get 100 points out of that. So I think it is the first step to try and awaken our conscience towards our own food. And if you look back in the day, our old men and women, they will grow older and older, up to 100 years, all owing to food. So I think you have done a very good job just to point us to a direction that we should take, even as African, to own our own food system, to value our own food system, to value our own, should I say, cuisines, as it were. Because wherever you go, you will never hear somebody speaking of an African cuisine or in the Ndebele cuisine or whatever cuisine that comes from Africa. But here, for example, in Bulawayo, we have got the Chinese restaurant, we've got the Italians, we've got the English breakfast and so forth. But where is our breakfast? I mean, as our breakfast. So I think what you have done, you have started, you have just started, but there is a lot I think that has to be done. There is a lot that, well, you and us incorporated have to do so that we can stand and got their own and I want us proud. Thank you, Min.
Thank you, Neville, and thank you, Kurt. Makhosi, you're welcome to respond to Kurt and Neville.
Okay. Kurt, I think one interesting thing about the Italians is that they embraced a lot of greatness, a lot of, I would say, great notes on the palate. They are able to taste food and take it as their own. They are really good ambassadors for food. And I also feel that for us, specifically if you look at the history I was talking about from my great-grandfather, you realize that they migrated a lot and they were taking in a lot of dishes from different cultures. And these dishes are new and they're unique. They've been there in the villages. And I've got a feeling that once we look at commercializing them or putting the mainstream, like I talked about the restaurant, once we get that and we get foodies, ambassadors, I think we could challenge a lot of food systems out there, and we could open new avenues for developing African villages. And then to Neville, Chuma, I think another thing is that we've never really been confident in ourselves. So we need to be confident. We need to embrace food from our own geographic location. I think that there's so much. Remember in the book, it's a book 410 pages with different foodstuffs. So one thing I know is that within that diverse food literature, you'll find something that really tantalizes your palate, and you can become an ambassador for that. You realize that in the urban cities, there's no diversity in their food, and the diversity is only there in the rural areas, in the villages. So we just need to be confident, and we need to be ambassadors, and we need to just love ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Makhosi. We're going to take one more question or comment. It's already past 5:15, so we've really gone way beyond time. We'll invite Paul to offer the last question or comment.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not really a question, but more of a comment. First of all, Makhosi, I'm really congratulations on the book. This is an awesome thing to know is happening, and especially coming from our brother back home. It's been something that I've been struggling with because I'm living internationally, and the access to traditional food has been something that I've always dreamt of, but never had, you know, I can't really experience the you know, that experience anymore unless I come back home. But I really offer, I would really like to give you my respect for having actually taken on the helm of this this topic, because I know that it may be challenging to actually expand beyond our borders, because the main challenge really is the ingredients, to get the ingredients from back home to a global stage. And it's one of the things that may hinder the way in which we spread the message concerning our African traditional foods. But I think, you know, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, and also with ambassadors. And I would like to say that I am fully passionate about supporting this and seeing it through, because yes, it's true that we have a certain level of disrespect of our culture, or we are ashamed of our culture in a sense, and which is a bit sad because it's amazing how much this side, whenever I make an African traditional dish, I am like the celebrity of the town that I am in. And it's something that we need to revive. So as a last word for me, I'd just like to offer my encouragement and my congratulations to you. And
thank you.
Keep going strong, my brother.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul, for offering those very supportive words. Yeah, and thank you so much for everyone who made comments and raised questions. I won't be able to pose my question now since we're running out of time, but like I said earlier, there's a lot to be gleaned from the book, a lot of ideas to think about when thinking about food politics, hierarchies, identity, how rituals have evolved, what constitutes rituals, how do we take people out on dates nowadays, as my colleague and as my brother Neville mentioned. So much evolution and shifts that we can think about when we just look at food, and also look at maybe epidemiologically. Well, maybe it's because I'm biased to think about health. So I'm interested to understand or draw from your book how health could be improved when we incorporate a more, as you say, indigenous African approach. I will wrap up this session by saying thank you so much, Makhosi, for your wonderful time and discussion on your book. And thank you everyone for being here. It was so nice to think about food from this perspective. I would like to invite you all to our next sessions that are happening this week. We have 3 other sessions at HUMA. On Tuesday, tomorrow, we have Stephanie Kitchen, who will be talking about, who will be in the African Publishers Debate and Co-Publishing Seminar. On Wednesday, the 7th, we have Professor Franziska Dabgen from University of Münster in Germany. She will be talking about extroversion and dependency in global knowledge production. On Thursday, we have the HUMA Interdisciplinary Seminar Series, the Attire Series, and we have Paolo Gabaudo from King's College in the UK, who will be talking about digital hermeneutics approach on the study of online politics. So please take a look at our website for these upcoming sessions, and note that our book lunch and book launch sessions happen every Monday at 4 o'clock South African time. you're welcome to join whenever you can. And thanks, everyone. Have a good day
you so
wherever
much.
you are in the world.